Well, good morning, Life Church. Man, you guys are getting really good at that good morning thing. My name is Jeremy. If I haven't had a chance to meet you, I'm the lead pastor here, and just excited that you're with us. We're starting our series on Genesis finally this morning. Listen, some of you have been in deep anticipation because we tricked you. We were supposed to start last week, and some of you have barely been able to sleep all week because you're just anticipating. I was supposed to do this last week, but hey, sickness calls, and we had to stay away from you. You would not have wanted me on stage last week, trust me. But we got Reverend Mark McKnight here instead, and wasn't that great last week? We were watching online, yeah. Actually, Rachel gave me the sickness. I don't know what she was thinking, but she thought it'd be a nice New Year's gift. I thought it was brutal. And very inconsiderate, but whatever. But we were at home watching and worshiping with you, and it was a really, really great, meaningful week. And I think that, the Lord has a way of just moving and speaking in ways that maybe we hadn't planned or thought through, and God can just work through anything. And I believe last week was very special for that. So, well, because I wasn't here last week, I'll say Happy New Year to you. It's good to see you all. I'm not going to do the joke, I haven't seen you since last year. I just did, so I'm sorry. Well, we're in the book of Genesis, and so it's the first book in the Bible, the very first book. And so as we get going with this, I'm going to go through a few background things, and then we're going to kind of dig in and go through the first chapter today, and then a little bit in the second chapter. It's going to be, I think I've mapped it out to be 13 weeks or something like that. It's going to take us right up until Palm Sunday, okay? Easter. So isn't that's pretty crazy. Just gives you an idea of we're coming close to springtime here, which is good, which means we're getting close to summer, which means also that fall and winter is coming again. So I always have to end with winters on the horizon, so. Okay, just 4 quick things before we dive into the book of Genesis. Just a little bit about Genesis. 4 quick things. Number 1, Genesis means origin or beginning. And it tells of the origin of creation, of the world, and also the origin of the nation of Israel. And we're going to go through the whole book. And then the authorship of Genesis, number 2, is often attributed to Moses, but the thing that we have to realize about that is that it's really debated, and it's beyond our reason and our what we're doing here on Sunday to dive into that. There's just so much scholarly debate on who actually wrote it. For our purposes, I'm probably going to reference Moses a lot as writing it, but there's parts of it that were probably written and added later or edited later because they reference places that Moses wouldn't have referred to. They were called that place hundreds of years after Moses, and so perhaps it was just edited by someone. There were potentially multiple authors, but we're going to, for our purposes, say Moses. For much of church history, it was always attributed to Moses, and so we'll often reference that. But just so you know, there's a lot going on behind the scenes with that comment. Number 3, Genesis is not, this is important. Some of you grew up with this. Genesis is not a science textbook or a lesson in zoology, okay? Now, some of you need to hear that. I thought it was all throughout my teenage years. I really did. We tend to look at Genesis through our 21st century lens, and when we do that, especially that first part of the creation account that we're going to talk about today, and when we do that, we end up majoring on things that were actually quite minor to the ancient reader and inconsequential to them, while the things that would have been of utmost importance to them as they're reading, we totally miss because we're just looking at it through a 21st century enlightened scientific mind. We know better. That's not the case. Okay, we need to look at it through their lens first. We need to understand what it actually meant to them. And so once we understand their world, we can actually begin to actually understand and grasp the meaning behind the book. Number 4, Genesis radically opposes ancient Near East thought on the origin of the world and the relation of God to humanity. So the first 11 chapters of Genesis, they present a worldview that would have been countercultural to the mainstream thought of the day in their world regarding the nature of God and His creation. And so we're going to explore some of those differences today and next week and in the coming weeks. And so with those few things in mind, let's dive into chapter 1 together. Let's begin by praying. God, we love you and we honor you today. And we just declare this is your word. God, this is your word. This is your truth. I pray that you would speak to us. Lord, I pray that you would just let these words land on our hearts today, and may they transform us to be more like you and more in love with you, more marveled by you and your creative order. Lord, I pray that any words that are just of mine would fall to the floor today. God, may we be just enthralled by you and your word. In Jesus' name, amen. Verse 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. You've probably heard that. Even if you didn't grow up in church, even if this is your first time ever in church today, you've likely heard that before. It's a very opening line of the entire Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The word create here, the Hebrew word that's used for the word create, it's exclusively used in the Old Testament to refer to an act of God. The subject of this act, the one who's doing the creating, is always and only God when it's used. It's God and God alone. And this is interesting because it gives us a clear separation of the God that we serve from anything anywhere else, including any other gods of any other cultures. There's no one like him. Only he can create in this way. And this is important because, again, thinking of the ancient reader and the ancient hearer of this, in a polytheistic world where they believed in multiple gods, there's a God for everything. The writer here, Moses, is making a really clear statement about Yahweh, about God, that he is the only God, that there is no other God that can claim the power that he has. He alone can create the raw material that we see, feel, touch, and taste. So other creation stories in the ancient Near East that we find, they're rife with stories of multiple gods having conflicts and battles with one another, and out of that conflict, or even sometimes there's gross sexual imagery, and out of that sexual imagery comes creation, or out of that conflict or battle comes creation from other cultures. In all these accounts, humanity is created as an afterthought to serve the gods. And they're bringing God's food or clothing or whatever the case might be. It always involves multiple gods. But in Genesis, we see revealed something so countercultural to the day. The world and everything we see was created from the mind and the word and the creativity of one creator God, Yahweh. This is countercultural. Like this people would have been like, what? And in order for him to create the beginning or the origin of everything around us, he must supersede that creation and predate that creation. And that's what we find in God's word, that he's from everlasting. He knows no beginning and he's never going to know an end. And this used to bug me. I don't know about you guys, but this used to bug me when I was young. Because I used to think as a kid and ponder the eternal nature of God as a kid. Now that sounds really like I was like the smartest kid in the world. No, it's literally just me sitting being like, how is God always was? Like how is he always there? And I'd go back in my mind. Okay, so he was there then. Okay, what about before this? And I keep circling back. And before I knew it, I got really dizzy. And I just could never understand. And that really bugged me because I felt like there's something about God that I can't quite grasp. And it made me just think, oh, like then... what, like if I can't figure that out, then is it possible? Is it possible? I didn't like how I couldn't comprehend that. But as I've gotten older and wiser and more mature, like a mature man you see standing in front of you today, I've come to love the fact that I can't figure that out. I mean, believe me, there's a part of me that wishes I could. Because if I could boil God's eternal nature down to some scientific formula that makes sense in my finite brain, the infinite God making sense in my finite human brain, then he immediately ceases to be God. Instead, it became a part of my worship unto him. The things that we can't comprehend about our God, his eternal nature or other things that we come across, it shouldn't puzzle us enough to withdraw from him. It can puzzle us for sure. But instead, it should actually, that puzzling should cause us to draw close to him in worship. Because we realize it's in that lack of understanding that I have of him that I realize how big he actually is, how great he actually is, how mighty he actually is, and that there's no one like him. Never has been, never will be. He alone creates the raw materials that set the universe in motion. So the Hebrew verb for create, it also portrays this idea of God bringing order to the chaos and giving purpose and function to everything that we see. And that's what we see in verse 2. It says this, and some of you are like, how are we going to get through the whole chapter today if we're only moving on to verse 2? Don't worry, okay? It's going to be a little bit long today, but we'll be out by 3. Now the earth was formless and empty, darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Here, God has created the raw material, so he's got everything created, the raw material, but it remains formless and empty. There's this idea that it's like purposeless, meaning it's got a lack of boundary, a lack of order, a lack of definition. But God's about to speak order into this chaos, and he's going to cause everything to go to its proper place and to take its intended and purposeful form. And this is going to take place over 6 days. So let's dive into those 6 days. Day 1, verses 3 to 5. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning the first day. So we're going to see this happen over 6 days. We're going to see God speaking it into being, kind of bringing that chaos back into order. And then he's going to declare that it was good, and then it's going to declare what day it was. So this was the first day. God brings order to light. He separates it from the darkness, and he gives it form and function. God calls the work of his hands good. He says it 7 times in this creation account. We're going to encounter it 7 times. And this means what is desirable, what is beautiful, what is right. And so immediately after God's handiwork, as he creates everything, he sees and declares his creation as good, as in right relationship with him. And this is different from other creation myths, because what happens in other cultures and other creation myths is there's battle and there's chaos. And out of that battle and out of that chaos comes creation. It spins out a chaotic world. But God's creation is good, right from his hands. It's good. Day 2, verses 6 to 8. And God said, let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water. So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it. And it was so. God called the vault sky. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. God's bringing order and form to the waters below, that's the ocean, and to the waters above, and that's rain. And the vault or firmament, it depends on what version, what translation you have, it reflects an ancient understanding of the world. Their understanding of the sky was a vault or a firmament that rested on big pillars on either end and that had doors in it to let in rain. And above that sky was where God dwelt. That was an ancient understanding of the sky. Day 3. And God said, let the water under the sky be gathered into one place and let dry ground appear. And as the dry ground appears, we see vegetation, trees, and plants come. So God's bringing order and function and form to dry ground, causing it to separate from the waters and bring up vegetation. And then day 4 happens. God says, let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years. And let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth. And it was so. God made 2 great lights. Remember that part. God made 2 great lights. The greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening and there was morning the 4th day. So God brings order and function to the light that he already created on day 1. He gives further order and function and purpose to it. He creates the moon and the stars from that light, and they're going to help in keeping time and marking off days and seasons and giving light to the earth. Now here's the thing. I wanted you to keep in mind that one part. Even though God creates the sun and the moon, the writer's careful not to call them by their names, the sun and the moon. He says 2 great lights. And there's the greater light and the lesser light. It's easy to just skip over this in our enlightened 21st century mind and to be like, oh, obviously they didn't understand our complex cosmology that we understand today. But that's not what's happening here. The reason is that every culture of the day in the ancient Near East had their own version of a sun god and a moon god. And these gods vary in purpose. Some of them were involved in creation. Some of them were for healing or determining cosmic events, provision for humanity, and the list goes on. Whatever their purpose was, they were sacrificed to. And they were believed to be powerful deities by the nations all surrounding Israel. They were worshipped. So Moses here is providing an account of creation where Yahweh, the only God, just creates these two lights, two great lights. And he doesn't even name either of them so as not to elevate them beyond what they truly are. Two lights in the sky created by one awesome God. And they are both subject to their creator. They're not gods. They're subject to their creator. And the authority that they have to rule off the day and night, to mark off the seasons, only comes through the sovereignty of one God. Do you see the pattern here? Yahweh is the one who provides light and healing for humanity, not the false gods conjured up by a lost and desperate people. I hope you're beginning to see what Genesis is all about here, this creation account. When we get bogged down by scientific questions, like, well, how does God create light before the sun? Or does he do it in 6 literal days? I spent so much of my teenage years and even early young adult years pondering a lot of those things. Why do they talk about a firmament when we know that that's not there? We miss the truth. When we focus on all those things, we miss the truth that this was never meant to be a scientific textbook, ever. It's to counter the false narratives that were circulating that deified the wrong gods. There is but one God, and he alone has the power to create all and to save all. Day 5, verses 20 to 23. God said, "Let the water teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky." So God created the great creatures of the sea and every living thing that which water teems. I'm becoming like Sam here. I don't know what's happening. Sorry, man. Love you. And every living thing with which the water teems and that moves about in it, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. He blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and increase in number." So in this section, God's creating. He's bringing form and function to life in the sea and in the air. And an interesting thing that we see here, I don't know if you notice it or not, but they're talking about, the writer talks about great creatures of the sea. And the Hebrew word for this used here is the same used in Canaanite mythology for supernatural sea creatures. These sea creatures served the god Yam, who battled the god Baal. And Yam was portrayed as a leviathan of the sea, a chaotic monster of the deep. If you like Loch Ness Monster, that's what we're talking about. The writer of Genesis is once again showing Yahweh is the lone creator. He is above all other gods, and catch this, he is the creator of even the chaos in the deep, and he alone can subdue it. Isn't that powerful? Day 6 comes along. And God said, "Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, the livestock, the creatures that move along the ground, and the wild animals, each according to its kind." And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. Then God said in verse 26, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. So here God brings form and function to life on the land. He creates all of the animals on the ground and humanity. Verse 26. I'm going to read that one more time. God says, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." When God says, "Let us make mankind in our image," he doesn't have a personality disorder. He's not confused. There's a few possibilities that scholars have debated over the years of what's actually going on here. Option 1, it's commonly been understood over the years, and what I was taught growing up, is that this is an Old Testament reference to the plurality of the Godhead. In other words, the Trinity. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. The God saying, "Let us make mankind in our image." As convenient as that is, it's likely not what's happening here. It's unlikely given the fact that the understanding of the Trinity and that doctrine came about much, much later and was not understood by Moses or the hearers of the day. Another option is that God is just so vast and incomprehensible and has perfect communion with himself, and that's what he means by that. It's unlikely from the Hebrew grammar with that. Option 3, and this is what I would subscribe to, is the most likely of what's going on. The us here is God announcing to the heavenly host of spiritual beings in his presence. These are spiritual beings before God, and they're referred to as the divine council. He's saying our image. He's saying, let us make mankind in our image. God's the one doing the creating, but he's bringing them into this picture. Our image indicates that these divine council of spiritual beings in God's presence, they also reflect his image in the spiritual realm, and we're to reflect his image in the physical realm. Now, I could spend 5 weeks on that, okay? So, we're going to skip over that. That was some of you are like, say what? What was that? I want to tell you, Lord willing, okay? I'm not completely committing to this because I could get hit by a bus today. That was very morbid. I don't know why I just said that. We are going to do an entire series on spiritual beings eventually. I'm in the middle of kind of prepping and doing some study for it, so it may not be this year, but it's coming, all right? So we're going to dig into some of that stuff because there's a lot of stuff going on there, or potentially going on there. But let's keep going because it's really beyond the focus of today. What does the image of God mean? That's important. And we're going to dive more into this next week. He says, let us make mankind in our image. That's what God is saying. So humanity is made in the image of God, and that sets us apart from the rest of creation. But what does it actually mean? Some have said, well, it means we have free will. Others have said it's our intelligence or it's our sentience. The problem with these things and others is that humanity, we don't have all those things equally among us. But the image of God is equal among us. It's innate within all of us as humanity. So what does it mean? We are God's imagers. What does that mean? His unique representatives on earth. We are called to govern the earth, to rule the earth. And the unique area that we have, that we're placed in, as if God was here among us. And he is through us. And living on this side of the resurrection, we get Jesus as our example. He was the perfect image of God. He embodied this with perfection. We have the task of stewarding the earth and spreading the rule and reign of God as his imager. It's a role. It's not a personality trait, a character trait that is, because that would be just different amongst all of us. It's actually a role that we're called into. It's a role that we're called into to step in and to fulfill now with the power of God's Spirit within us, to be God's image and to bear it unto his creation, to rule and reign on behalf of him, to be his image. Day 7 comes along. Chapter 2, verses 1 to 3. See how quickly we got through chapter 1 and chapter 2? Trust me, I was debating how we were going to break this down. We could have spent 62 weeks on this whole series or whatever, right? But we decided to do, let's keep it narrative driven and see the beautiful story of God and his creation and how he brings about his purposes for humanity. Verses 1 to 3 in chapter 2. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing, so on the seventh day he rested from all of his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. So this is the first instance and the theological framework and background for the Sabbath. God creates, and then he rests, and he delights in his creation. He calls it good. Very good, actually. So there's other creation myths from other cultures, and this is important. So what's so different about the account in Genesis that we just read there, that we kind of skimmed through? What's the purpose of it? Here it is. Genesis shows that the entirety of creation flows out of the creativity and the breath of one creator, Yahweh. And while other creation accounts involve multiple gods and they're battling each other, and some of them involve weird, grotesque sexual imagery that creation comes out of, well, in the face of this polytheistic world of multiple gods, Genesis screams one God, Yahweh. Genesis shows humanity as the climax of God's creation. In other creation accounts from other cultures, humanity is just an afterthought. They're created to serve the gods by bringing them food or other things. Through the creation account in Genesis, Moses was writing to what they understood about the world that they lived in. And he was revealing how God is the almighty creator of everything that they see. He wasn't trying to give them a lesson in a science lesson about gravity or how to split an atom or the quantum realm. That's not his purpose here. And sometimes we look at it with that kind of eye. Oh, I bet you he actually meant with that, but the quantum realm, is probably what he was saying. I don't think so. I don't think so. It's not his purpose. It's not a science lesson. This was a reframing of their ancient understanding of how the world was created to dismantle any remote possibility of any involvement from any other God but Yahweh. It is by the breath of his mouth alone that we have what we have, and Genesis retells and reframes those ancient traditions of the account of creation and the origin of everything we see by putting God as the one and only creator. He stands alone. He has the ability, the unique ability, to create raw material by simply the breath of his mouth. He speaks, and mountains just thrust up from the sea. And dry land releases the water and brings forth life and vegetation. He alone is the one who created the deepest, darkest, most unexplored parts of the ocean deep, and he alone can subdue even the most mysterious and chaotic creatures. He created them. He created the chaos, and he subdues it. He speaks, and the earth starts moving. The sun starts shining, and the moon starts glowing and pushing and pulling the tides. Oh, and by the way, he created the stars. No big deal. It's kind of mentioned as an afterthought. Oh, and he made the stars too. He just breathes out galaxies, and he stitches together the smallest parts of the atom. Is there any other power that you can think of that can stand up to him? For other cultures, it was just easy to spread it out amongst the gods, right? Because that's a lot of work for one god. There was all kinds of gods involved, and there were battles happening, and this god took care of this, and this god was over here doing this, and they had a battle, and out of that came this. For us, it's not just any god that we're dealing with, or multiple gods that we're dealing with. This is the God of ancient eternity past. He is infinitely powerful and incomprehensible in all of his ways. He doesn't need any help. And he didn't even need the creation, but he wanted it. It caused him great delight and joy. He called it very good. It was good to him. And in fact, after he created us and all of creation was done, he says it was very good. When he looked at the entirety of the work in his hands, that's what he says. Is this a God that you can fully grasp and completely understand? Don't be like me when I was a kid, trying to figure it all out, thinking that I got it down. The things that you can't understand about all this, let it press you in to worship him. The same God that created everything that we see knows your name. He knows my name, and he longs for you to bear his image, to represent him now in this earth. He is the lone creator. Now take his image. He created you to do this, to bear his image. It's unique among all of his creation, to govern and rule on behalf of him, to take his kingdom and his power and his glory and spread it to the ends of the earth, to bear his image, to build his kingdom on this earth. So the question is today, will you recognize him as God, the only God? And will you bend your knee to him and him alone? The creation account in Genesis stands as a testament to the nations surrounding Israel. It puts them on notice, and it says, the gods that you're serving are no sooner able to tie their own shoelaces than they are to create anything. They are incapable and unable to create any raw material. Now that's a bold claim. It's saying that the gods that you're giving your allegiance to and your affection and your attention to, that you're serving, that they're not able to save you. They're powerless. And they're not able to deliver you. And in fact, they can't even deliver themselves from the chaos that came out of their creation. God alone creates life. Yahweh alone, God alone sustains life. And God alone subdues the chaos and brings it into perfect order. And it speaks the same thing over us today in 2025. What gods are you serving today? I mean, you probably don't have an idol of Baal or an Ashereth pole or anything like that set up in your house, I'm guessing. I hope you don't. But what gods are you serving today? In other words, what are you giving all of your allegiance, your affection, and your attention to today? What gods are you serving? Yahweh alone deserves all of your attention, all of your affection, and all of your allegiance. No one else. And it's time to give it back to the one and only Creator. He alone gives life, and in Him alone you will find your God-given purpose to be His imager to the earth that He created. I want to pray for you today. And I want us to just turn our attention to Him. And can we just take a moment without anything else happening right now? And can we just worship Him? He's so great and He deserves all of our praise. I hope as I was prepping this, I was just like blown away by Him. Can we just take a moment, just marvel at Him right now, just in your own way, just worship Him. He's great. God, you're so good. And you're here right now, Creator of all the universe. We worship you, God. There's no one like you. You deserve it all. God, we don't need to do anything special to conjure up your presence or anything like that. You just love us, and you are here right now in the simplicity of this moment. Church, just begin to worship Him right now. He's worthy. We don't need any music playing. We don't need anything. He just is worthy. He just is great. He created everything. He is the lone creator. There is no one like Him. He alone creates the raw materials out of the breath of His mouth. He alone subdues the chaos and brings it into perfect order. And the chaotic sea, we'll talk about it next week, but in Revelation, it does away with the sea. At the end of all time, God subdues it into perfect, complete order. He's great. He's a great God. I'm going to pray for you, and as I do, I don't know if perhaps you've never actually bent your knee to this God, and you've never actually given your life to Him. I want to tell you today, the truth of what we talked about is so real that He alone is God. There is no one like Him, never has been, never will be. And you could spend your time trying to find other things to give your allegiance, attention, and affection to, but at the end of the day, it's always going to come up short because nothing comes close to Him. He alone is God, church. He alone is God. And so I want to encourage you today to bend your knee to Him and Him alone. And so I'm going to direct us to do that. And perhaps for you, that's your first time, where you've given your life to so many other things. But I want to encourage you today, direct your attention to the one true God, to Yahweh, to Jesus Christ your Lord. He came to this earth and He gave His life up so that you could have right relationship with Him once again, so that you could be brought back into relationship with Him. And so I want to pray for you with that. And as I do, I just invite you, whether it's your first time giving your life to Jesus or just once again, you just want to direct your attention to Him. For all of us, let's just go to the Lord right now in prayer. God, I give you my life right now. I give you all my attention, all of my affection, and all of my allegiance. I recognize that there is no other God. You are God alone. There's no one like you. And I bend my knee to you and you alone. God, I give you my life. I surrender every part of me. I give it to you. I'm sorry for all the things that I've been chasing down in your place. I'm sorry for all the things I've been trying to find to put in your place and to follow. You're the only thing worth giving everything to. And so, God, I do that afresh this morning. Take my life. I bend my knee to you, and I reject all other gods that are before me. They are nothing. They cower before you. They crumble before you. You stand alone. And now I just exalt you, and I put you in the highest place of my life. You have all authority and all power and all control. You are the unique one, the creator of everything. And we honor you and we glorify you. in the mighty and matchless name of our God.